Right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our November 2024 webinar, The Gut-Brain Connection in Parkinson's. I'm Chris Rattan, Parkinson Canada's Scientific Communications and Knowledge Translation Specialist. We'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement and some quick housekeeping matters before getting started. From coast to coast, Parkinson Canada acknowledges the ancestral and unceded territories of Inuit, Métis, and First Nations peoples. Now, during today's talks, if you'd like closed captioning, please click on the CC Captions button below, and then click on Show Subtitle. We're always grateful for the expert speakers who join us to share their knowledge during our webinars. If you have any questions about today's topic after the conclusion of the webinar, please contact your healthcare provider or the Parkinson Canada team. Now, any resources mentioned today will be included in our follow-up email, along with a link to a recording of the webinar, so there's no need to take any notes. For Q&A, please submit any questions you have for our presenters by typing them into the Q&A window found at the bottom of your webinar window. This will help us monitor them more effectively. Please avoid using the chat window to submit your questions, but do feel free to use the chat window to say hello and talk amongst yourselves. Now, when the webinar ends, please take a moment. We will send out a short survey that we use to evaluate our programming, ensuring we deliver content that's relevant to the Parkinson's community. Now, let's get started. So on behalf of Parkinson Canada and the research team, I'd like to welcome everyone to a very exciting talk today on the gut-brain connection in Parkinson's disease. Diet and exercise have been strongly linked to Parkinson's disease and other neurodegenerative diseases and Parkinson's symptoms, and a lot of research is being done investigating that relationship and helping to shed light on how the gut-brain axis impacts health. This includes the question of neuroplasticity and how lifestyle factors can help protect the brain from harm, ways that diet can impact motor and non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's, and more. Now, Parkinson Canada, in order to help support this work, we fund a lot of research every year investigating this work across the field, and we've dedicated a large amount of money to efforts like this all over Canada. Over the past calendar year, we actually had our highest funding envelope where we were able to dedicate $1.9 million to researchers across the country who are working on innovative projects, pilot grants, just things helping foster and develop innovative discoveries in Parkinson's and help train the next generation of research leaders to help continue this work going forward. Next. You can see here just a quick overview of our funding through the years. Next. And you can see here just the breadth of work that we support across the country. We have applications for our annual research competition coming in just from coast to coast, a lot of really great work, and we're very proud to be able to support the research infrastructure and researchers in Canada. And so another thing that we're participating in quite heavily is something called C-Open. Which is a collaboration with Brain Canada as well, just forming a network, helping develop the infrastructure of research within Canada where individuals in the community can go, they can participate in studies, they can help be connected with researchers. It's really a very expansive project. And actually recently they've just published, next, their first study and recap of the Parkinson cohort, which is sort of the initial group of people who have signed up for the platform and have participated in C-Open. So it's very exciting to see this continuing to grow as time goes on. Next. Now, during previous and future funding cycles, we're excited to dedicate a variety of grants to researchers investigating issues related to lifestyle factors. Things like exercise, things like diet, which is what we're here to talk about today, that can really help support people and improve their quality of life with a PD diagnosis. Next. Now, as I mentioned, we have dedicated a lot of funding and grants to researchers investigating issues related to diet and the gut-brain connection more specifically, as a part of a larger focus on lifestyle factors more broadly, like I mentioned previously. This includes work looking at using vitamins as adjuncts to PD treatment due to potential mechanisms of neuroprotection from harmful protein aggregates and dopaminergic cell damage, the effects of probiotics to help address anxiety in patients with Parkinson's disease, which was a research question that came up from the differences seen in the gut microbiome between those with and without PD, and the impact of probiotics on mental health outcomes in other populations. Now, some of this work we've supported also includes research by Dr. Cresswell, who's we're very lucky to have joined us today on better characterizing the gut microbiome, how people's bacterial profile is correlated with clinical indices and PD symptoms. We're very proud to support all of this really extremely important work and to be able to improve public awareness of this work through webinars and events just like this. Now, in addition to funding researchers, we're also dedicating a lot of effort to better connecting with the community of people affected by Parkinson's in order to bring this research to you and to share key updates to the people who, at the end of the day, are going to be most strongly impacted by it. That's where events like this webinar come into play. It gives us an opportunity to bring research to everyone in the community, to allow you to ask questions, to be engaged more in research, and to interact with scientists and clinicians in ways you might not otherwise be able to. Next. And as a part of this work into better engaging the community in research, we've been hosting patient engagement workshops across the country. We believe not only in helping to bring information on science to the community, but engaging members of the community as valued partners in research. These workshops have really given us a great opportunity to bring everyone into the same room and to have productive discussions on how to better connect community members with research opportunities, make those opportunities more accessible, building public awareness of research as projects are taking place, and overall just how to improve the utility of research into improving patient lives. Now, moving on to why everybody has actually joined us here today. Next. I'd like to go ahead and give a very warm welcome to our speakers and first introduce Dr. Silke Cresswell. Dr. Cresswell is a movement disorder neurologist and associate professor for medicine and neurology at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, where she holds the Marg Mickley Professorship for Research in Parkinson's Disease and directs the Pacific Parkinson's Research Center and the UBC Movement Disorders Clinic. Her research focuses on the role of the microbiome and nutrition in Parkinson's disease and related brain disorders, lifestyle interventions, as well as non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's. She leads several clinical trials and is also passionate about the use of ultrasound in helping to guide botulinum toxin injections to help treat movement disorders. She's also the founding director of the BC Brain Wellness Program, is a member of the International Movement Disorder Society Task Force on Wellness, and has previously served as the president of the Canadian Movement Disorder Society and the director of the Canadian Residence Course for Movement Disorders. Thank you again so much, Dr. Cresswell, for being here, and I will let you take it away from here.
Thank you very much, Chris. Really appreciate that. And a warm welcome from me as well. I'm coming to you from the ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people in Vancouver in the Lower Mainland. I'm going to share my screen now and make this a slideshow. But then, there we go. Okay, can you see the slides okay? Can't hear anything, but I also don't hear any protests. So
yes, we can.
Can you see them?
Yes.
Good. So I'm going to talk to you about the gut-brain connection in Parkinson's disease. I'm sure you've heard a lot about this. As Chris already mentioned, this is very much based on research that we've done, including with support from Parkinson Canada, but several other entities as well. For conflicts of interest, I've done consulting work for some pharma companies. I do cohort studies as well as clinical trials into the gut microbiome, into diet, probiotics, lifestyle interventions in Parkinson's disease. And with that, I'll introduce the gut microbiome in Parkinson's, or getting to know your 100 trillion closest friends, because that is how many of them are in our guts. Much more genetic information than we have just from our own human DNA alone. And it's not really surprising, because if you think about it, here's Earth and how it developed. So we're looking at a really big time scale right now. About 1 billion years ago, bacteria first made an appearance on our planet. And then for all the development that happened afterwards, you know, all the fish, the dinosaurs, the birds, the mammals, everything that came after that developed in that soup of bacteria and other microbes. And so if you think of us as a kind of a hollow tube for starters, filled with bacteria and other microbes, the functions that those bacteria have fulfilled from the very beginning then shaped how we as organisms actually developed and what functions we take over ourselves. Some of them, mitochondria, for example, are actually a joint venture between what used to be bacteria, and then they merged with our own cells to provide energy to our cells. So when we look at the microbiome, we look at an incredibly ancient system that is very adaptive, but that also has very much shaped everything that came after them. They live in and on us. We already mentioned bacteria, viruses, fungi, archaea. They weigh, if you were to weigh them all together, about the same as the human brain. And the highest density of microbes is in the colon. So that's the large intestine, the large gut. There are many, many different connections between the gut microbiome and all these other organs. And we, of course, talk about the gut-brain axis today, but there's also the gut-liver axis and the gut-skin axis and the gut-muscle axis, etc. So this field has literally exploded in the last, I want to say, decade or decade and a half. There are an enormous amount of different activities going on. And as you can imagine, looking at the connections with all these organs, there's also then an enormous connection and lots of research going on with all the different conditions that you can have that affect all these different organs. And here the authors have looked at the gut-brain axis, list a whole number of conditions. And Parkinson's, I would argue, is probably the one where we have the best evidence for a connection between the gut microbiome and gut function and the brain. So what do the gut microbiota do? So we've already seen in the previous slides, they actually do an enormous amount, but just to focus on some of the most important ones, they defend us from harmful microbes, so infections coming in. They break down nutrients for us. They produce hormones. They are very active metabolically. They produce other messengers as well. They produce vitamins, so for example, vitamin K or vitamin B12. They process toxins that come in, so pesticides, but they also can process drugs, pollutants, etc. They, of course, have a huge influence on gut motility. They train our immune system, and they even influence the brain and behavior. So how do we know who's there, and why didn't we know all of this before? Why is this kind of a missed organ that we're only really discovering now? So first off, most of those gut microbiota are actually anaerobe. So in other words, they can't survive in oxygen. Oxygen kills them. Anaerobe means they can't tolerate oxygen. And so as soon as you take them out of their natural habitat, which is the gut, they get killed off. And therefore, most of those microbes are pretty difficult to culture. It's possible, but it's difficult to grow them in the lab. There is, as I mentioned, this genetic potential of the microbiota, and that is actually what we call, strictly speaking, the microbiome. But you'll see in the literature, microbiota and microbiome is used somewhat interchangeably. And the microbiome contains about 100 times more genetic information than our human genome. That is a plus, though, and now with technologies that can do high throughput genetic sequencing, we can actually analyze this genetic information, and that's what we're doing to understand who is there. And then with that genetic information, we can identify specific bacteria and fungi, etc. And of course, all of this is helped by advances in computer technology, which allow us to do these hugely complex operations. What influences the microbiome composition and function? As you can see, there are many different influences, age certainly being one of them, diet being a big one. Medications can influence that, physical activity, even things like your mode of birth, whether it was a cesarean section or a vaginal delivery. And also things like comorbidities, the geography, genetics, where you live, and importantly, slow transit time, slow gut transit time, which translates into constipation. And you will see constipation as a really key factor, both in both our talks, I think, this morning. And when we look at constipation, and look at the development of Parkinson's over time. So the red line here is when a diagnosis is generally made, and the diagnosis is a clinical one. It's based on the clinical motor features, so the movement features of slowness, and then you have rigidity, so stiffness or tremor with that. But way before these motor symptoms come into play, there are other symptoms, and constipation is one of the earliest one. There can also be RBD, REM sleep behavior disorder, acting out of dreams, as well as hyposmia, which means lack of sense of smell. So also affecting essentially an immediately connected space to the gut, the nose, which is also heavily populated by microbes, of course. And when we look at constipation, it seems that there's something that is happening early on in the gut. And maybe even, and this is difficult to prove, but maybe even, and certainly the case in some of the animal models, Parkinson's starts in the gut. When we look at people who've got Parkinson's disease, over 80% have what we call a slow colon transit time or constipation. It can also, having constipation lower down in the gut, can then lead to delayed emptying of the stomach, and that can lead to problems with levodopa absorption. Yeah, it is also associated with changes in the gut microbiome, and it is associated with faster progression of Parkinson's as well as cognitive problems. And practically speaking, just having so much material in your abdomen then pushes on the bladder as well. We see a loaded gut here in an X-ray, and there's we use the Bristol stool chart a lot in the clinic, or mostly in clinical research. And so constipation is often associated with type 1 or type 2 kind of stool, so hard and lumpy. Those early symptoms, as I mentioned, affecting the gut and the nose are, of course, correlating to areas, internal contact areas where the environment and our organism is in direct contact, and all of that at the interface of those two are the microbiota. What is quite interesting is that inflammatory bowel diseases, so Crohn's disease, colitis ulcerosa, is associated with a higher increase or a higher risk of Parkinson's disease later in life, but this risk can be reduced again by using medications that reduce this inflammation. They're called anti-tumor necrosis factor alpha medications, which is another hint that the gut might actually contribute to the risk and the development of Parkinson's later on. What we can also see in the gut of somebody with Parkinson's is that there is mild gut inflammation, so not as bad as you would get in colitis or in Crohn's, but mild gut inflammation and reduced barrier function, so leaky gut. We can also see alpha-synuclein as a key pathological protein in Parkinson's that then accumulates, becomes insoluble, and is probably one of the major players in the neurodegeneration of Parkinson's. And that can be found early on in the nervous system of the gut, although there's some discussion around how specific this finding is. We can not only in the gut, but also in the blood and the cerebrospinal fluid, see increased inflammation in Parkinson's disease. And inflammation, that's going to be one of the other key concepts here that you'll hear a lot about today, is key to the development and maintenance of Parkinson's disease. There's chronic low-grade inflammation that is called inflammaging, which is understood to be a key driver of aging. And of course, age is also the greatest risk factor for developing Parkinson's disease. So constipation and inflammation are going to be key concepts we'll look at. And then there is the actual physical connection between the gut and the brain. Of course, there is the immune system that also travels via, for example, the blood, but there is a hardwired connection. It's like the highway, and it's called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve connects the gut and the brain, and it's a two-stream, bidirectional highway. It communicates both ways. Interestingly enough, the area where the vagus nerve connects to the brain is, at least in a good portion of people, the first area of the brain that is affected by these pathological changes that we see in Parkinson's disease. And if you, believe me, people used to do this as a treatment for ulcers in the stomach in the past. If you surgically cut the vagus nerve, so you completely cut this, you completely sever this connection, then these people, as we see in the graph here, the people in the dotted line who underwent this, what was called vagotomy, they actually have a lower risk of developing Parkinson's disease in the years or decades after this operation. This does not work if you only partially cut this nerve. This didn't work out in all cohort studies, but it has also been shown in animal models. And in animal models, it also been shown that the vagus nerve is an important highway to transport alpha-synuclein. Remember those clumps that are insoluble and start building up. And the vagus nerve can transport alpha-synuclein from the gut to the brain and then cause Parkinson kind of conditions. So Chris already mentioned research, and I'd really like to highlight this and the importance of support for research, including from Parkinson Canada, for which we are very, very grateful. And then I'd like to introduce the Vancouver study into the microbiome to you. So we have over 300 participants. Those are just, there are actually quite a few more, but we published on the 300 people. They get a clinical assessment, very detailed. We took fecal samples, nose samples, oral samples, blood samples. We're doing metabolomics in the blood and looking at inflammation markers. And about half of them were followed for 5 years now. This is all in close collaboration with the microbiologist, Dr. Brett Finley, here at UBC. And to illustrate how this all came about, one of the earliest papers that we published from that cohort was a paper that showed that there are clusters of microbes, because they are not just individual species, but they also cluster together, that are either supporting health, in this case cluster A, or they are bad, cluster B. And cluster A is more common in people who are healthy controls and less common in people who've got Parkinson's. And cluster B, the bad one, is more common in Parkinson's disease. And butyrate, which is one of the short-chain fatty acids, which is important to reduce inflammation, and that is produced mostly by these cluster A bacteria, or it's more common with cluster A, whereas in Parkinson's disease, because we have less of these butyrate producers, these butyrate producers are actually lower. So less production of butyrate, which is a short-chain fatty acids, which dampens inflammation. So more inflammation in Parkinson's. And then we did metabolomic studies, which is the chemical fingerprint of biological processes. And we found that there are higher levels of harmful bacteria in the blood samples of people with Parkinson's, or bacterial metabolites, I should say. They are called, the two main ones we found, there are several others, are p-cresol and phenylacetylglutamine. And the more you have of this cluster B, the more you have of p-cresol as well as of phenylacetylglutamine. This was then taken to the next level with another much more detailed and more modern analysis with metagenomics that again showed this large-scale disruption of the gut microbiome in Parkinson's disease. This was work done by Dr. Avril Metcalf-Roche, he did his PhD on this, so he is now finished. And this work was supported by Parkinson Canada. This also showed that there was a correlation with some of the clinical symptoms. The more disruption there was also more clinical symptomatology. And this then led to, this is just to illustrate how research then, after it gets the seed, which we got, including from Parkinson Canada, how this then leads to international collaborations, in this case with Malaysia, Taiwan, the US, and within Canada. We also had we followed some avenues that didn't turn out to be any big stories, so fungi don't seem to play a major role in Parkinson's. But we then also, and this is work by Dr. Mihai Sresti, who did the first study that I showed you as well, we also found that some of the microbiota can play a role in the metabolism of levodopa already in the gut. So you might need more levodopa with specific bifidobacteria if they're present in the gut. In the meantime, to summarize what has happened in the field, there have been over 30 correlational studies into the gut microbiome worldwide. And although not completely overlapping, the learnings from all of that is there are differences in the microbiome composition in Parkinson's and healthy controls. There's less bacterial diversity, less anti-inflammatory bacteria, more pro-inflammatory, so inflammation producing bacteria. There's, as we already saw, a reduced production of short-chain fatty acids. There's less carbohydrate metabolism, but more protein metabolism, and higher levels of toxins produced by gut bacteria in the blood. And then also that same cohort, we then analyzed for the role of diet. And we're still working on that. But what came out of this study was that those adhering to a Mediterranean type diet, so the people were binned into thirds, the upper third, the middle third, the lower third, have actually a significantly later onset. So they're older when they get their Parkinson's disease than those who eat a poorer diet. The difference in men was up to 8 years, and in women, it was up to 17 years. Now, this is correlation, it's not causation. So it might be that people who get Parkinson's earlier eat a poorer diet. But what we also found was, and we see this here, that CRP levels, which is an inflammation marker, that these inflammation levels were actually higher in those people who ate the poorer diet, and they were lower in people who ate the better, more Mediterranean diet. So to summarize that, healthy diet with lots of fibers, so the bacteria produce short-chain fatty acids, like the butyrate. There is a nice mucus layer. The neurons, so the nerve cells in the gut wall, are also happy. But if we have dysbiosis, we suddenly have changes in the composition of the gut microbiome. We have inflammation. There is leakiness, as you can see here. Alpha-synuclein, that small, these red little squiggly lines, starts accumulating in the gut, and then through the vagus nerve, it is transported to the brain, and the inflammation then can be transported through the blood to the rest of the body and the brain. So what can we do as potential therapies? So there are what we call prebiotics, which is fiber and is nutrition. So diet therapy. We can look at probiotics, I'll get to that, at potentially fecal microbiota transplantations and antimicrobials, so antibiotics that would take out specific harmful microbes, and then there are postbiotics and small molecule drugs that would learn what is the actual molecule that is important in the microbiome and then replace that. That brings me, and Nicole will talk about this in much more detail, to a healthy diet, Mediterranean diet, and a mention of what would be the worst of the Western diet. I took this picture in one of the large supermarket chains that you're probably all familiar with, and that's the food on offer. And if you think about this is processed, fried, red meat, sugary drinks, pastries, sweets in excess, all driving inflammation. So avoid that. Generally speaking, and just briefly, so with a healthy diet, the risk of Parkinson's disease goes down, premotor Parkinsonism goes down, the age of Parkinson's onset goes up, the rate of progression goes down, and mortality goes down. All of that being really quite impressive, and I don't see any reason why we should not implement this at present, although we don't have a lot of interventional studies at all to show yet. So fiber, just briefly, I think Nicole will touch on this, and just in the interest of time, I'll keep that short. Important because the microbes eat it and make short-chain fatty acids to tame inflammation. And with that, we then also have a really lovely mucus layer that then, here in blue, that then protects the gut wall here and keeps it nice and tight. And there's no inflammation, but as we already saw, With the Western and high-fat diet, you get the opposite. The mucus layer disappears. There's leakiness. There's inflammation. And so coming back to constipation, so constipation, we already said, there's prolonged transit time, irritable bowel syndrome, leads to changes in the gut microbiota, leads to production of toxic metabolites and reduced production of short-chain fatty acids, leads to increased local inflammation, damage to the lining and function of the gut, which then worsens constipation. And then you have this whole vicious circle, which then has systemic effects as well. So important to treat constipation, but I know that Nicole has a slide on this, so I'll skip over this right now. Coming to prebiotics, probiotics, and probiotics. So prebiotics, as we already mentioned, mostly fiber, important for constipation and possibly also levodopa availability. A word about probiotics, and we get this in the clinic all the time. So most of the probiotics currently are lactobacteria and bifidobacteria. Given that there is such a huge variety of microbes in the gut, this is a very narrow slice out of this microbiome. Both of those actually are already increased in Parkinson's disease. And we saw one of those bifidobacteria could actually process levodopa, and then it's not available to you. Occasionally, there's also enterococcus in a probiotic, which can also degrade levodopa. And the probiotics that we can buy right now that are on the shelf in capsules or the sachets are really bacteria that survive the exposure to oxygen and that can be packaged essentially. So there's high quality evidence from randomized controlled, placebo-controlled clinical trials that you can use probiotics for the treatment of constipation. There's another study showed this in fermented milk with fiber and a multi-strain probiotic. But I would say that the benefits for other symptoms, motor and non-motor, in the studies has been somewhat mixed. We need more high quality and dedicated studies. We've also done those studies, and I think we just really need to up the game here. And I would say for constipation, there are lots of other things that are less costly that you can do for constipation first. And then last but not least, there's the brave new world of fecal microbiota transplants, which is actually very established and very helpful therapy in Clostridium difficile gut infections. In Parkinson's, there are 4 randomized placebo-controlled trials, all relatively small, very mixed approaches. There's possibly some improvement of motor function in one study, but then not in others, and there's some improvement of constipation. Just to say, there is a lot of variance here of how these studies are being done, anything given from 30 grams of feces to 1,200 grams of single application to 12 weeks of twice weekly. So I think we need to really figure out for fecal microbiota transplants, which might be very helpful, but we need to figure out a lot of the details here. So dose, duration, frequency of application, whether to pair it with a dietary intervention, et cetera, So essentially, don't do this at home, because I know there's a lot of that on the internet and the recipes how to do this. Do not do this at home. So in conclusion, the gut microbiome in Parkinson's disease can drive inflammation, damage the gut lining, and foster a leaky gut if there's dysbiosis. Constipation then is associated with more severe gut microbiome changes, which in turn can lead to more constipation, which then leads to worse dysbiosis and worse clinical outcomes. So really treat constipation. Diet is a major modulator of the gut microbiome, and a healthy diet, so fresh fruit and vegetables, fiber, nuts, water intake, is really important to improve constipation and also improve Parkinson's outcomes. Probiotics can be helpful for constipation, possibly other symptoms, but we really need more studies. And fecal microbiota transplants are currently under investigation, certainly with mixed evidence, and we need to optimize the approach. And with that, I want to thank everybody who has contributed, particularly all our research participants who really are absolutely crucial, without whom we couldn't do any of this work. I want to thank all the team members wide and far who've been working on this. And then, of course, every organization that has supported this work, and particularly, of course, Parkinson Canada, and also the Pacific Parkinson's Research Institute and the Western Family Foundation, the Parkinson Society of British Columbia, who've been very supportive. VGH UBC Hospital Foundation. And with that, I stop here.
Thank you so much, Silke, for that great talk. I was really struck just by how all-encompassing the gut microbiome is, and just found it very interesting how the GI health profile is just completely different between patients and healthy controls. It really is quite interesting. Let's see. So now I would like to introduce our second speaker of the day, Nicole Shuckett. Nicole graduated with a Master of Science in Nutrition and a certificate in gerontology from Case Western Reserve University in 1996. She has been a member in good standing of the College of Dietitians of Ontario for 19 years. Nicole started her career at Baycrest and worked there for 12 years, where she developed a passion for working with older adults and their families. During her time at Baycrest, she worked with clients in a wide range of illnesses, specializing in neurological disease and helping clients with the nutrition challenges that go along with them. Nicole worked at the Jeff and Diane Ross Movement Disorders Clinic for 8 years and the ALS Motor Neuron Disease Clinic at Sunnybrook for 12 years. During this time, she gained an expertise and passion for working with people affected by these diseases. Nicole currently has a private practice in Toronto. And over the years, she has developed an expertise in working with clients with Parkinson's disease, ALS, and other neurological illnesses. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome, and I'll hand things over to you.
Hi, everybody. I am, oh, now my screen just went wonky on me. 1 second, everybody. There we go. Hope everyone can see that screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry, everyone. My screen just went loopy on me, but here we are. Welcome, and I am so glad that I could speak with you. I'm going to take everything that Dr. Silke Appel Cresswell spoke about, and I'm going to kind of make it into, and what do we do today, and how do we make sure that we're eating well today so we can get the most out of the food we eat when we have Parkinson's disease. So these are my contact info if you need to reach me after this talk. I hope I can hear from you. Look forward to hearing from you if you have any other specific questions. I'm in Toronto, in Ontario, so that is where you can find me. So what I want to talk about is, what is a healthy diet? What are the nutrition-related symptoms of Parkinson's disease? The management of nutrition-related symptoms of Parkinson's disease, and and most importantly, while we are here today, the link between the gut and Parkinson's disease. So everybody always says, what do we do if we have Parkinson's, and how should we be making sure that we get the best diet? I wish I had a cure from the food that we were eating to cure Parkinson's, but we don't. So the key is that we need to make sure, though, that we're following a really good diet. So what does that mean? We eat a healthy diet. You maintain a good, healthy weight. You eat regularly, no skipping meals. You drink enough fluids, at least 6 to 8 cups a day. And you want to make sure your bones are getting as much good calcium and vitamin D as possible. And often I say that's really one of the only supplements that you need to be taking, especially now that the sun has diminished out of most of Canada. We need to be getting 1,000 international units of vitamin D by a supplement, because it's very hard to get it from food. So there is no special diet for people with Parkinson's, but we just want to make sure we're following that good old say it as you come, following Canada's food guide to healthy eating. So you want to make sure you have plenty of vegetables and fruit. They should be half of the food that you're eating, and the brighter the color of the foods, the better. Now, I know it's the winter months and the food and vegetables are not as great as they were in the summertime, but it's still really important to be getting a lot of vegetables and fruit in your diet, and they can be frozen. They do not have to be fresh. So don't worry if you can't buy fresh. Choose whole grain foods, bread, pastas, and rice. And then the other thing is to be eating protein foods. This includes meat, poultry, fish, nuts, legumes, dairy products, and eggs. You want to make sure you're having a lot of superfoods, as I call them, the best foods that give you the most bang for your buck. So those things include things like antioxidants, which are all the bright colored fruits and vegetables like spinach and berries and cantaloupe and things like that. The other thing is making sure you have a lot of fatty fish like salmon, sardines. The fattier the better because it's full of really good fats, and lots of nuts, which are also really good. So almonds, peanuts, crushed as a butter, any way is fine. And then you want to make sure you're having healthy fats when you're cooking. Things like olive oil, the fatty fishes, avocado, flax, all of those things should be the way you base your meal. So when you're cooking, it's really okay to go goog with your olive oil or your avocado oil because they're all really good for you. You just have to remember they have a lot of calories, so you don't want to be having tons of it. Unless you have to worry about that you've lost weight, then have all the olive oil you want. The other thing is water, fluids. Water is considered a nutrient. It's really important that you have enough fluids. You need to have about 6 to 8 cups of non-caffeinated fluids every single day. So there's many nutrition-related symptoms of Parkinson's disease, and I could speak about all of these for a long time. And in the interest of time and the interest of us getting to the questions, I'm going to go through them very quickly. But really, they all pertain back to the gut. Because if you're not having these things, if you have any of these symptoms, they all actually impact how your gut is working and how your body is able to manage the pills you're taking for your Parkinson's. So you really want to make sure that you're doing well and not letting this happen. So weight change. Often people will lose weight when they're diagnosed with Parkinson's, or they will gain weight. You want to make sure you're at a good weight. GI issues such as constipation, which we've spoken about, gastric emptying. All of these things are very common in Parkinson's. Swallowing issues, dysphagia, drug-nutrient interactions. Because you're taking so many medications, you may have a dry mouth or excess saliva, or having issues with your blood pressure, which means your blood pressure drops and you feel dizzy, so you need to have enough sodium in your diet. Bone thinning because you're not getting enough calcium, and then the effects of protein in your diet. Really, when it comes to the gut, there are 4, 5 things that you can help in order to make sure that your gut is working as hard as possible and you're getting the most impact of the medication you're taking. Because if you have issues with with constipation, your medication and your body will not be doing well. So you want to prevent constipation. You want to make sure that you're not having issues with your gastric emptying, which often occurs in Parkinson's disease because everything is slowing down. That should say nausea, sorry about that. And then taking a probiotic or a prebiotic in terms of your diet or in terms of a supplement. So constipation, as we've already spoken, is very common in Parkinson's disease. Constipation really means no bowel movement, not every day, but it can be every other day. And also, everyone needs to know, if you are constipated, your medication is not going to work as well. So you really need to make sure you do not allow yourself to be constipated. So you need to take a proactive approach to making sure you're going as well as possible. Why are these things occurring? There's a slower movement of the GI tract. Things are moving through the body slower, part of the Parkinson's process. You're not moving as much. We know if we're moving all the time, we have less, if we lie in bed more or move less, our bowels do not move as well. All the medication that you're taking can affect constipation, and also diet changes. And all of these things will affect how well your bowels are working. So what do you do about it? We've spoken about them. Key things, the most key things. Eat foods high in fiber, fruits, vegetables, whole grain breads, bran cereal. Sprinkle it, add it, eat it, do anything with it, but just make sure you have it. When they started creating cereals way back then, a bran bud was the first kind of cereal. And guess what? Those are the best cereals. So if you have bran buds every day, that is a really good thing you can have, and other fruits and vegetables. Drink more fluid. Really try to be drinking more fluids and ones that are not caffeinated. Soup, water, fruity tea, soda water, all of those things. Increase your exercise with your ability. It will help you move your bowels better. The more you move, the more you move in retrospect. And then some people may need to take a little bit of help. I'm a big proponent of PEG 3350, which is called Restorelax or Laxaday. The key is you need to take it every day, not when you become constipated. You need to be taking it. For some people, they can take it 365 days a year. There is no reason not to. You can be taking it your whole life, but don't stop and then only take it when you become constipated. You can be taking it all the time. And if PEG isn't working for you, you may require an over-the-counter medication, and there are lots there. You just need to talk to your physician or your pharmacist about them. There's often delayed stomach emptying in Parkinson's disease, this bloating, belching, heartburning, or a fullness feeling occurring. And that is why this maintenance of a healthy gut is so important, which leads us to what you can do about that. Limit alcohol, caffeine, carbonated drinks, sit upright at a meal and 45 minutes after eating, limit foods that trigger symptoms, avoid straws or sucking on candies, and sometimes people will need a medication. A gastric motility agent can help with that. Nausea, very common in Parkinson's disease. Take your medication with a soda cracker or fruit. Try ginger as a candy or a tea. And the other thing is, don't let yourself get hungry, because often when you get hungry is when you get nauseous, which kind of doesn't make sense, but that's what we have found. Then we talk about prebiotics. Those are the foods that promote the growth of the good bacteria and keep our guts healthy. Things like all these fibery foods, oats, millet, chia, quinoa, legumes, leafy greens such as kale. All of them are only going to do good things for your body. And then probiotics, which refer to foods or nutritional supplements that contain microorganisms such as bacteria or yeast, are meant to support our health. Examples include kefir, yogurt, cheese, pickles, sauerkraut, sourdough bread, another typo that I just saw, I'm sorry. They support the healthy lining of the gut and allow healthy digestion. So really important to add these pre and probiotics as another one of the superfoods that you can be eating. And then we don't really have time for this, but I just want to make sure you all know that there is a link between your L-DOPA and the protein in your food, and you should not ever take your L-DOPA with a meal, because you will not get the most bang for your buck out of it. So to conclude, so we have time for questions. The keys is to maintain a healthy weight, maintain a healthy diet, strategize to improve nutrition-related symptoms, and what I always say, enjoy the food that you're eating, because food is delicious and it does wonderful things for our bodies, and just enjoy it. So thank you, and now I think we're going to move to questions.
Great, thank you so much, Nicole. Yes, especially for webinars like this with patients and a lot of community members in attendance, it's always really important to have that practical takeaway as well as the research, so that we can really provide a very comprehensive overview of the subject to everyone. So thank you. So yes, now we are going to move on to a question and answer portion for both of our keynote speakers. Here at the end, we have some questions submitted beforehand and also some questions being submitted in the chat. So we will try to get through both, as many as we can. So the first thing that we've seen, is there a relationship between mitochondrial dysfunction and poor digestion that could help influence the GI issues?
Well, I think I'd give a general answer to that. Mitochondrial dysfunction is certainly implied and it is one of the pathomechanisms in Parkinson's disease. So for anybody who doesn't know what the mitochondria are doing, they are creating the energy in our cells, and so they keep our cells alive and power all the processes that we need. Now, are there specific trials or interventional studies that would look at that? Probably, I'm not aware of that in humans, but because diet and gut function is closely correlated to onset, development, progression, survival with Parkinson's disease, and that again is coming with all these GI symptoms. I would think that probably there is a connection, but we need to do more dedicated research into that to answer that conclusively.
Right. Thank you. Our next question, is there any connection between celiac disease, IBS, Parkinson's, these sort of more general GI specific disorders, and Parkinson's disease specifically?
Yeah, so with irritable bowel syndrome, yes, that is actually, along with constipation, can be one of the early symptoms that later somebody develops Parkinson's disease. And irritable bowel syndrome can also come with that inflammation. It's different from constipation because you've got constipation and diarrhea, and then you've got pain and gas and all of that. But it can be a very early symptom of Parkinson's disease. Celiac is not associated with Parkinson's to the very best of my knowledge, but the inflammatory bowel diseases like Crohn's and colitis ulcerosa, they do come with a higher risk of Parkinson's.
Great, thank you. So someone else mentions they're curious about weight loss with Parkinson's, and also if there's any kind of a connection with all of the weight loss drugs, like GLP-1 agonists like Wegovy and things that have become very popular, very hot topic as of late.
Nicole, do you want to speak to the weight loss? I'm happy to then chime in afterwards.
I'll speak to it and then you can add on to it. So often people, when they first get diagnosed with Parkinson's, experience weight loss. Because when you think about it, when you have Parkinson's disease, your body is actually working harder because it's burning more calories. And as the disease progresses, and if your tremors are not controlled, or even if they are controlled, you're burning lots of calories because your body is always moving. So you need to make sure you're having extra calories to make sure you're not losing weight. I have not, and you can speak to address this. I have not heard of anybody taking any of those medications who have Parkinson's. My gut feeling, as we talk about the gut, is that's probably not a great thing to be doing. But I can't answer that question. What I can answer is this, that if you are losing weight and you're below your ideal weight, you need to be eating more and be having more high calorie, caloric rich foods that are good for you, like more oils, more fatty fishes, more nuts, anything that can keep the pounds up. Because as you start to lose weight and you become more frail, if you fall, there's a much higher risk of you breaking a hip or something else occurring, and then there's a whole spiral effect. But the key is to maintain a good, healthy weight. And I will pass it on to you.
Yeah. So yeah, weight loss is actually quite an issue in the clinic in my experience as well. We certainly see that with Parkinson's progression, and unlike most other medical areas, we are more concerned about weight loss than, if there's excessive weight gain, that's a different story. But weight loss is something that can come with progressing Parkinson's, and completely echo what Nicole just said. Now, for the GLP-1 agonists, they are, of course, they're all the rage these days. There is data from animals that would support it. It's also helpful in Parkinson's disease. There's probably a direct brain function as well. The GLP-1 agonists act in the gut when food comes in to increase insulin levels, which then lowers blood sugar levels. But they can also lead to reduced speed of the gut working. So they can lead to paralysis of the stomach. They can lead to constipation. They can lead to nausea. So all things that are already a problem in Parkinson's. And there was actually a recent phase 3 trial. So that is kind of the definitive trial to look at whether these medications are useful with exenatide. The results were just released to the participants in the trial, which I think is actually a great thing, that they tell the people who participate in the trial first before this is actually published in a journal, in a scientific journal. And unfortunately, that was a negative trial. So we don't currently have evidence. Exenatide is one of those GLP-1 agonists from human studies to support that we should use this in the clinic. Having said that, looking at the mechanism, and of course, if you take a drug, they often exaggerate that mechanism even more. But looking at the mechanism of GLP-1 agonists that can, for example, lower blood glucose levels, that is something we can also achieve through lifestyle intervention. So a healthy diet, exercise, all these good things, reduced stress levels, reduced inflammation. So I would say it comes back to doing what we just said in the talk, to really have a healthy diet, mostly plant-based, lots of fiber, to move a lot, to do exercise, and you can mimic those effects.
Thank you so much. Now back to the question of probiotics, which has come up quite a bit. With there being such a large number and diversity and supplemental probiotics and things, would you both be able to comment on sort of what is ready and could be a good candidate for patients to take? And likewise, are there any probiotics that patients with PD should specifically avoid?
I'm happy to. I mean, I can jump in and then you can add to that. So
you start and I'll finish.
Pardon?
You start and then I'll add.
So as you saw in our talks already, when we talk about probiotics, there is the actual capsule or sachet that you can buy with like a curated selection of different microbes, often freeze-dried or so that they can be alive again. And then there are the foods, and that I leave the fermented foods and all of that to Nicole to comment on again. For the probiotics, now we are running trials into that as well. Yeah, I would say at this point, do I recommend my patients to take probiotics in the clinic? Not quite yet. I think we're at the level of probiotics 1.0. These are mostly bifidobacteria and lactobacilli in different kinds of those groups, which are already increased in Parkinson's to start with. And some of them can actually, as we showed with some of the bifidobacteria, can actually digest levodopa, which is the last thing you want. And so they have been shown. There are some very good level studies by Barrichello and by Dim to show that they can be helpful in constipation. But there are lots of other things you can do for constipation. And I think this is a somewhat expensive way in treating constipation. The effect for other symptoms is, I think, needs to be established better. We looked at our data here from our latest trial recently, and there's certainly also a placebo effect in all of that. So and you want to always, even if you choose to take probiotics, and there's certainly not a specific product I would recommend or recommend against, you have to make sure to feed them the right stuff as well. So feed them the fiber and the plant-based food so that the whatever bacteria you're ingesting are actually thriving. Nicole, over to you.
Yeah, I would say that unless there's other GI issues going on and you would need to take that probiotic, the best thing is the food. So things like yogurt, which is like going to give you all the awesome calcium that you need, cheese, pickles, sauerkraut, sourdough, kefir, food. Food is always the best source. Food is the best medicine. It's better to have food than a supplement. So I would vote for food over a pill any day. So a yogurt a day keeps the doctor away. So that's what I would do.
Great. Thank you so much. And we have time for one more quick question before we close. And this one is, what advancements have been made in understanding sort of how fecal microtransplants can impact long-term gut health, and if this could be a way to help prevent the progression of Parkinson's.
Fecal microbiome transplants, you're saying?
Yep.
Yeah, so that was the end of my talk. So we have about 4 randomized controlled, placebo-controlled trials at this point. Some have shown some improvement in motor function, but the methodology needs to be really figured out. I think it's a very interesting field, and I'm certainly we're working on this as well. And but I think, in all honesty, we just need to do better trials and to truly make any recommendation. Don't do it at home.
No.
Great. Well, with that, I believe we are out of time. So thank you so much, both of you, for sharing such great information here today and speaking to everybody. If anyone in the audience, if you'd like to learn more about this topic, or if you have other questions about Parkinson's and care partnering, please feel free to contact Parkinson Canada's information and referral team at 1-888-664-1974 or support@parkinson.ca. Please watch your email inboxes for a follow-up email. We'll include a link to a recording of this webinar and any other resources or links that were mentioned here today. And we'd also like to go ahead and invite you to our next webinar, Candid Conversations, Advanced Therapies for Parkinson's, on Wednesday, December 11th from 2 to 3:15 p.m. Eastern Time. During that webinar, members of the Parkinson's community will share their experiences with DBS, Duodopa, and Vyalev, and we'll also hear from someone who's participated in a recent focused ultrasound research trial. Watch your email inboxes for more details and a registration link on that as well. And lastly, when our webinar window closes, please do take a moment to fill out our short survey. It helps us plan programming that's relevant to you and the community. Now, on behalf of all of us here at Parkinson Canada, I'd like to thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you in December.